Alrighty, so it is 5:30 now. Cool. Hopefully everybody is doing well. Had a good Labor Day weekend, I think it was. Um, so before we really get started, do we have anybody so far who is still having issues either contacting Carrie or getting a hold of Solidworks? Because we will be using it today and going through it today. Okay. Um, so if that is the case, then I am going to start going through the lecture. The lecture is posted on Web Campus, so if you guys want to go there and follow along with it, you can. I'll also stream it just so that everybody will be able to see it just for the video as well. Um, but it will be available on Web Campus as well. Uh, it'll be a relatively short lecture, um, and I will go through just a couple of other topics, um, just pertaining to kind of getting things settled for SolidWorks. Um, is it showing or is it just showing a white screen?
I'm just getting a white screen.
Oh boy. Okay, let me see. Because I'm getting one too when I'm looking at my screen share. Let's see. Let me try to reload the document. Maybe that'll help. Not that. What the heck? Is it still showing white screen? Dang it.
Yes.
Uh, if you guys have access to Canvas, then just go through it on there, or look at it through there. I'll try to figure out why it's being so finicky on Discord by the next time. Um, but the lecture will just be going through just extrude cut, as well as just some information regarding lines and kind of how they work. So I'll just quit streaming, and then hopefully it works when we get onto some other stuff as well, like SolidWorks. Stop. Okay. So the first thing, let's go on video in the meantime. The first thing that we will talk a little bit about is just sort of the general SolidWorks interface. So if you do have SolidWorks up and running on your computer, so open it up right now if you could, and then we can kind of start talking a little bit about some of the various uh, just general features, things that you're going to be interacting with quite frequently. Um, so on the left side of your interface, you will have your feature manager. This is typically where a lot of your sketches are going to start. So you can designate which plane you are going to, which plane you'll be sketching on initially. And then from there, a lot of the features, whether it be an extrusion, revolving it around some sort of axis, or any of the other sorts of features that we'll be working with throughout this course, will typically be listed there. We also have our command manager. So the command manager is just your way of sort of getting around to different aspects of SolidWorks. This is going to encompass your features, so those extrusions, extrusion cuts, any sort of specific screw holes or holes you need to make, shells, all of those things that we'll be getting into later. Your sketch menu is also in there as well, so the tab for it will be in there. As well as some other stuff regarding evaluating your model. So SolidWorks does have some simulation and evaluation softwares in it. Um, I think I mentioned it last time. I don't know if we'll really touch on it too much this semester, but we might. There is some information regarding it that we could go through, but in the meantime, we'll just sort of go through the general interface. We have kind of like our file and just our general main menu toolbar at the very top. The heads up view toolbar is also pretty helpful. That's going to be able to kind of redirect specifics about cross sections of your model, getting a better view of your model as well. So we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more once I actually open up SolidWorks and kind of show you the interface a bit more. Um, as well as just view options. So being able to view it maybe with specific, I believe it's just your general lines, getting better views of your model in general. On the right, we have a task pan. So this will deal typically with some toolboxes, I would say. So toolboxes, as well as a little bit regarding e-drawings that you will kind of deal with a little bit later once we get into getting or once we get past kind of just creating our models, we'll go into how can we take these models and create an understandable drawing for anybody to replicate that model with. And as well as on the bottom, we'll just have our units. So SolidWorks is pretty nice where we can just sort of switch up whatever units we're working with. That's just the display. You can always just change whatever or give a specified unit using the smart dimension, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But this is going to uh, it'll be a good way that you can sort of flip back and forth if you need to. If you need something specifically for in SI, or perhaps you want something in inches, pounds, seconds instead, uh, that's your way of going back and forth between those sorts of units if it is uh, of necessity. So after that, we'll talk just a little bit about the alphabet of lines. So I won't go too deep into this. I do have a PDF that is both. It should be on Web Campus as well, and I posted a link for it in the PowerPoint. This is just a way to reference lines that are in technical drawings. So I remember last time we talked a little bit about technical drawings, which are just a way to specify that we have some sort of drawing that does indicate important information, whether it be measurements, angles, any of those sorts of things that have some sort of point to them. As it says in the PowerPoint, none of the lines in a technical drawing should be pointless. All of them should have some sort of function, whether they be an edge, specifying a hole, and a lot of the things that you'll see in these technical drawings will also have other specific meanings. So sometimes you might have things where they reference a through hole, so a hole that's going to go directly through a specific part of our model, and those will be indicated kind of like a bullseye. So if we pull that up, we'll kind of have just a very brief discussion of the alphabet of lines. So I just pulled this offline, or just off Google. It does have some good information on it. So a lot of this is just regarding, so if we're just sort of going through the type of lines in the applications, usually with regard to any sort of solid lines that you see, those are going to be things that are in your direct view. Anything that's dashed, at least a uniform dash, is typically going to indicate parts of the geometry that you're unable to see. Uh, and these can be indicated in technical drawings as well, as you can see kind of in this rectangular prism that does have some sort of slot to it. You can see on both the length and width profile that it does have those dashed lines there, indicating that there is a hidden region from that view. However, if you're kind of looking a top-down view of it, you can see the entire profile of it very easily. Center lines are typically going to be a combination of both dashed and more longer lines, so short lines and longer lines. This is just a way to indicate that there might be some sort of, I wouldn't say line of symmetry, but some sort of line that, or axis that is going through something. It'll typically be shown on either holes or anything that has some sort of circular component to it. That's more often than not when you will see center lines. Lines of symmetry, as you might expect, it's really just indicating, hey, there's symmetry between these two sides of it, indicated by the opposing sides of that line of symmetry. Extension lines, usually you'll see those whenever you're doing any sort of smart dimensioning, or when you're working with the drawing. It's just a way to indicate that a specific measurement is related to some sort of width that we'll typically have, width or height or length or any of that. It's fairly self-intuitive. Once we start playing a little bit more with the software, it'll just sort of be a way to indicate, hey, we have some sort of measurement here that is uh, related to whatever side we might be talking about. The nice thing about it is that we're also able to um, see this for angles as well. So SolidWorks is able to give these sorts of dimensions or these sorts of lines and indicators by way of angles as well. Leaders, this is just a way to indicate that we have uh, some line that's going from whatever our dimension is directly to the location itself. So it might be a way to, or a better way to indicate, hey, we have a measurement that's over here, but there's a lot of stuff already going on where we need to have that measurement. So it's a good way to indicate, hey, this dimension is referencing maybe this radius for a hole over here, or perhaps this side length over here, just because there's a lot of clutter. There's already other stuff going on. So usually those extended arrows will deal with leaders. Um, break lines. Break lines are just a way to indicate, hey, we might want to see a cross section of this. We can only get so good of a view from a two-dimensional angle, so these break lines are a good way to say, hey, let's see what's going on maybe in between here, or what's going on, or maybe that there is a cut here and we want to see kind of a better profile of what's going on. You wouldn't really know what the profile of, I would say, the cylindrical component is, whether it's square or rectangular or cylindrical, unless you kind of maybe had a good cross section of it, or perhaps were able to see it from a different angle. Cutting plane, so this is just a way to say, hey, maybe we have something going on in this region, but it's hard to see from a two-dimensional angle, or perhaps this is just a poor dimension to look at it in. That cross section, or rather that cutting plane line, is just a way to indicate, here's another way that we can look at that image. And typically it will be shown off to the side. Usually a cross section, or excuse me, a cutting plane is indicated by perhaps it's cut across plane AA. So usually you might see, say, an AA next to the top figure and an AA next to that bottom two concentric circles that we'll see. As we indicated, visible lines are really always going to be a way of referencing, hey, we have something in view here, something that we can actually see, as opposed to dotted lines, which are indicating that it's out of view. Section line, so that's used to indicate that the surface is being cut into a section. So typically you will see that accompanying your break lines or perhaps your cutting plane lines. So whenever you see that kind of hatch pattern, very light hatch pattern, it's typically indicating that what you're looking at is actually inside of a part right now that's being cut via cross section. View plane line. So it's used to indicate direction of sight when a partial view is used. I believe that's just referencing or kind of very similar to the cutting plane line and phantom lines. I believe that's just similar to kind of the things that we can't really see, so it's indicating, hey, that there's something behind it. Or, yes, as it says right there, alternate positions as well. Um, we might see some of those a bit later on when we're dealing with assemblies to kind of indicate what this assembly is actually doing. Does anybody have any questions with regard to the alphabet of lines? A lot of these things you will tend to see just over time and over kind of using the software. And I'll try to point them out as best I can whenever we are doing either in-class assignments or if there's anything on the homework that might be a little bit ambiguous. I think I briefly mentioned that as well on the when I uploaded the homework assignment. So does anybody have any questions about that so far? Okay. So we can get back to the PowerPoint now. So now we're going to get just a little bit into creating sketches. Um, I I might pull up SolidWorks here. Uh, I'll go through it a little bit later. It's kind of tricky to go back and forth between the two, but I'll kind of just demo creating sketches uh, into like an extrude after. Yes, I'm not presenting on a separate screen right now. For whatever reason, the screen share isn't working very proper right now. So the lecture is on Web Campus right now. So if you could just pull up Web Campus and follow along from there, the lecture is being recorded right now, so I will be able to post it, and you guys will be able to see what's going on from my screen as well. I don't know why the heck. I think Discord's just been kind of funky today. Um, so if you guys do have access to that, just follow along on there. Cool. Um, so when we're dealing with creating sketches, yes, yeah, the extrusion one. So that's the one that we're going through right now. Cool. And then, okay, so the all of your sketches are typically going to start off from that sketch tab in your command bar. So usually whenever you're loading up SolidWorks, the first thing that you're going to typically do is going to be making some form of a sketch. And then this will come along with either other extrusions, um, revolutions, any of those sorts of things to create further or additional geometry that's going to be three-dimensional. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select that sketch button. What that will do is it's going to prompt you as to what plane you would like to uh, begin on. So what's nice is that it's already starting us off with our three dimensions from the start. However, if there already is another plane that you would like to work on, typically not as necessary when you're first starting off a part. But you can always start off from a different plane, and we'll kind of get more into that later when we talk about what you can do after you've made an extrusion. So it's cool. It highlights all of those planes that you have readily available for you right there, and you can select whichever one you're going to sketch on. Once you select it, it'll kind of hone in on it, put your view normal to that sketch plane, and then you'll be able to start selecting your tools, whatever sort of desired sketch you're going to want to make. When we start off there. Yeah, so you want to click on part first. So I should have specified that. Part is going to be where you start off. So we're going to make our e-drawings from the parts. So we will always want to start off from some three-dimensional model first, and then it'll transition into some drawing, something that someone else can replicate. So yep, select the part, and then from there you'll be able to get to just your graphic interface. It says it's full. Shouldn't still be full. Let me try this. Let me see if I can do this. It says we're at 26 out of 25. So I don't know why it would have issues putting another person in. It won't let me move people over. Oh, that's frustrating. I don't really know how to get around that. Because didn't we have more people in here last time, if I remember correctly? Um, I'm not sure if anybody has any idea, considering it's at 26 out of 25. I'm not entirely sure why it's still struggling to let people join. Let's see. Let me try to fix this. I don't know if I can. um, Maybe this. Hold up. Well, that's stupid. Apparently, if somebody is on video, it won't allow more people to join. Uh, I might still be able to screen share if that's the case, hopefully. I hope I can, or else I'll be quite frustrated. Okay. Well, then we can continue if that's the case. Uh, Save it. You can just save it with your. I mean, there will be an upload. Um, so there's an upload option on Canvas. I should be able to grade everything from there, but do include your name. I don't really mind any sort of specific like input with regard to like your file name, just as long as it has your name on there, and I'm kind of able to see what's going on. Cool. All right. Okay. Hopefully the issue is solved. Noted for next time. Okay. And for anybody just joining now, we are just going through the lecture through Canvas because Discord's being a little bit finicky today. Second time in a row. Okay, so we're on to creating sketches. So when you're creating a sketch, or when you're able to create your sketch, uh, you can choose any of those planes once you hit the sketch button, and it'll immediately kind of hone you in normal to that view. From there, you can also create or also start a sketch on any of those uh, planes that are already given. So all you really need to do if you want to immediately start off on, say, the top or the front plane is you just need to right-click on that plane in the feature tree and then click the sketch button. That'll be the furthest left. It's the same symbol as what you'd see on the sketch menu. Um, and that'll give you access to all of your tools from there. So with regard to creating a sketch, I gave just a little bit of a breakdown of kind of what you would expect on if we were just to create a box in this case, starting off with just a simple rectangle. So we can click on the rectangle tool, but also if you click on the arrows to the right of each of the selected tool, you're able to get a better sense of um, all the different tools that are already available to you for that specific geometry. So you can make a corner rectangle, which is just going to be composed of the opposite corners, but you can also use a center rectangle. So a center rectangle is almost like creating, I would say, like a circle, where you're going to start from the center of that rectangle, and then you're creating your sides from both your length and your width, just how far out you are able to drag it. So you just need to click once in the center wherever you're keeping this geometry or wherever you're initiating this geometry, and then just dragging it to whatever given side to create the dimensions to it. Um, so once you create that rectangle, it'll give you a breakdown of all the different parameters. So those parameters are going to include the x and y coordinates of each of the individual points, including the center. So you'll notice if you kind of take a look, the center point is on 0, 0 for this specific rectangle. That right there, we are on slide 6. Um, that right there is going to be your origin. So what is nice is that you start there. I believe, I don't think I included it on the slides, but if you start your drawing from there, whether it be with a center rectangle or a circle or any other sort of geometry, it should specify kind of like a little square next to it. I think it's yellow if I'm thinking about it correctly. That's just indicating that it's coincident to the origin. So that's going to tell you, hey, this geometry is always going to start at the origin, or rather, it's going to have its center point right at the origin with the way that you're making it. Other things will be coincident as well when they're, I guess you could say, either points or lines that are directly on top of each other. Um, so from here, you're typically going to want to uh, dimensionalize it in some manner or another. So you'll see right next to the exit sketch button at the top left, you'll see Smart Dimension. So Smart Dimension is just a way to allow you to assign dimensions to this specific shape or to this specific geometry. I believe for this geometry I made it a 10 by 20 rectangle in millimeters. So it'll, whichever one, you don't have to specify one side before the other. It'll sort of automatically assign a dimension to the other side based upon what the other one will be. Um, so this sort of leads into the discussion of defining sketches, slide 17. So this just shows a breakdown of all the different colors you're going to typically see whenever you're working with defining your sketches. So kind of like what I was talking about before, we want to smart dimension this shape that we have. So we're always going to want to try and assign dimensions to things just to make sure that nothing is ambiguous. Light blue lines are always going to indicate what is currently selected. So if you don't already have, say, a tool or smart dimensions active and you click on a line or curve, it will select that line or curve. Anything that's in blue is going to be considered underdefined. So anything that has an ambiguous measurement to it. Those are things that we're going to need to have some sort of constraint, dimension to, or otherwise. You're always going to want to try and make sure that uh, your sketches are always defined in some manner or another. Um, So we can see that an underdefined sketch is always going to have blue lines to it, kind of the darker blue. And then if it's fully defined, that means that nothing is ambiguous. Everything has some sort of definition to it, whether it be angles, whether it be measurements. Um, its constraints are already met. Typically, with the shapes that it already gives you, so your squares, rectangles, circles, arcs, it's going to give some sort of constraint to it already. So you can see on this defining sketches slide, it already is showing that if we're looking at any of these rectangles, it's already showing that the two sides on the left and right are going to be vertical. So it's indicating that both of those sides there are vertical. They don't necessarily have to be equal to each other or parallel. It's just saying that they are vertical to each other. And likewise, the top and the bottom are indicating that they are horizontal. So since it's typically it will provide some sort of definition to those common 2D geometric shapes that we already have. Um, and then if you get yellow on your sketch, usually you'll know this happens. It'll pop up with some sort of issue that it's stating. And this is to indicate uh, that your shape or your sketch is overdefined. So overdefined means that it has too many requirements to it. Sometimes this will happen when you might be creating some sort of constraints or requirements for your sketch. And this could create issues. So usually whenever this happens, you're going to want to try to clean that up in some manner by either getting rid of uh, some of the constraints that are already there, or possibly reassigning dimensions in some manner or another. This will be indicated by a plus sign next to your sketch, kind of in that feature manager or the feature tree on the far left. So you'll know whether your sketch is underdefined or overdefined, whether or not you have one of these symbols next to it. If it doesn't have any symbols, that's a good sign. It means that we don't really have to give any further input. Sometimes, depending on our sketches, we might want to give additional input to it, but if it's fully defined, that means that the software already knows, hey, there's nothing else that really needs to be done with this. You don't need to define it more unless there's any specifics that you would like to add. Is there any questions about defining sketches? So usually you'll see kind of like the overdefined thing if you try to assign another dimension to, like you see in this picture, adding another dimension on the other side that we already know it has to be 50 provided that it's a rectangle. So in that case, software might yell at you and be like, hey, I already know it's supposed to be 50. You don't need to assign this dimension unless you're trying to do something crazy or different here. Um, Everybody good with that? Hopefully. Cool. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about the extrude boss. Um, so once we're done with our sketch, so it can be as simple as just um, the rectangle that we had before. So I think for this sketch right here, I assigned it as a 10 by 20. So it had a width of 20 and like a length of 10, um, just as a standard rectangle. Um, Upon just clicking the extrude boss and base button, this is going to ask you, well, what would you like to apply this to? Keep in mind, so this button is going to be in the feature part of your command bar. So the far left option on that little tab bar kind of near the top. Um, so once you are able to click on that, once you're able to indicate, hey, I want to extrude some sort of shape here, it's going to want some sort of parameter, something to extrude. Uh, there's a couple different ways of doing this. If you exit out of the sketch and then you choose the extrude boss base, you're going to want to grab from the feature tree near the bottom, or near the kind of like the graphic screen. So the feature tree kind of disappears, but just to the right of it, you'll see something that says part one or some indicator that we were working with a part. That is a drop down menu. It's just another way to access our feature tree if there's some sort of menu that's already pulled up by virtue of the features. And it'll give some details. So it tells us, hey, we need some sort of plane to sketch, um, or we need some existing sketch to use this feature on. So what you want to do is here, if we click this first without grabbing the sketch, we're going to want to click the sketch after we've said, hey, I want to use the extrude boss. So upon clicking the extrude boss button, then we can hit that drop down menu and select that specific sketch. From there, it will kind of show you a little ghost image of what we're dealing with. Um, so I provided just a little note here. If you didn't exit out of the sketch originally, you can go to the features tab and then hit extrude boss, and it'll automatically say, hey, okay, this is what you're trying to extrude. All right, I'll just kind of fast track the process. So there's a couple different ways of getting to your extrude boss menu. From there, you'll be able to see kind of a ghost image of what you're working with. So next slide, it shows kind of a yellow indication of uh, what our 3D object will look like. Um, so this gives a lot of information on it, not just the figure itself. And I'll kind of break this down on the next slide. So the following slide gives lots of details to it. First of which is just going to be your OK, cancel, and deleted or detailed preview. Um, Typically, we're not going to be really dealing with any sort of detailed previews, but it's a nice little thing that you can kind of take a look at and see what we're working with in another manner or another. The from menu is designating where that extrusion is beginning. So typically if you've already selected a sketch, it knows that you are starting from a given sketch plane. However, there are other options of creating sketches as well, or creating where the origin of this is. So you can create from other surfaces or faces if you already have a three-dimensional object in your graphic uh, menu. You can also offset your extrusion as well. So the offset button just allows you to say, hey, I already know what I want my sketch to look like, but maybe I want it 10 millimeters further up from where the sketch plane already is. We can create this offset in the event that maybe the location where we want this geometry is already really cluttered and it's pretty difficult to sketch where we want it to be. We can change the direction of the extrude, so that's just that kind of back and forth arrow, the ones where they're parallel to each other but in different directions. That's just going to change the direction. And then there's other options in our direction drop down. So blind just implies that it's going to be some distance. We might not know, or that distance is going to be indicated by the depth. It doesn't really, blind is typically going to be your default option. Um, Perhaps you have some sort of other geometry that might be not necessarily parallel to uh, the sketch plane, but some geometry already um, within the interface already. Your up to vertex or up to surface is going to help with that. So sometimes you might have a curved surface that you want some sort of extrusion to either come off of or to meet with. That's what your up to surface is going to be. It's just a good way of saying maybe we only want an extrusion to go up to a specific point or face without going beyond that or creating other unnecessary geometry. Offset from surface, so this is similar to your offset, kind of where the sketch plane is, um, and the up to body as well. So we can also have it go up to maybe just a specific body in general rather than it being a surface. This would probably be necessary if you have something where maybe the extrusion is going to go up to some other sort of object, but it has a weird surface to it. Maybe it's either curved or perhaps there's several surfaces that that extrusion might go up to. Maybe it has trouble indicating which surface it would try to meet with, so it will just go up to a body instead. In midplane's actually kind of cool. What it's going to do is it will kind of distribute the extrusion evenly uh, among both sides of the sketch plane. So it's kind of similar to doing the changing directions, only instead, let's say if we have a 10 millimeter depth of the extrusion, if we chose midplane, it's basically going to do 5 millimeters on each side of that sketch plane, whatever our sketch is. So it just evenly distributes the depth between the two sides of that surface. Draft is going to allow us to not only extrude our shape, but also do it at an angle. When you click on your draft button, it'll give you the ability to indicate an angle. It also, right below it, didn't indicate it on this slide, but you can draft your extrusion either inward or outward. So let's say you want to make, say, a cone. You might want to start from some sort of circle, create an extrusion, and then we can draft that shape to create the cone, kind of pull the top inward. I think I'll demo that once we're all done, kind of get an idea of what's going on. There's also a second direction option that allows us to say, hey, maybe the mid plane wasn't enough. Maybe I want it to go uh, 10 millimeters in one direction, but I only want it to go 5 millimeters in the other direction. You would accomplish this by doing a second direction. And that's going to come with all the features that we've already seen for direction 1. So anything you can do for direction 1, you can also do for direction 2. There's no restriction there. And also thin features. Thin feature is kind of a way of creating almost like a shell. There's a lot of options in there, so I won't go too much into it, especially considering we're going to be covering how to make a shell a bit later on in the semester. But this is another way that you could create things that have some sort of border with thickness to them, kind of like when we were looking at the alphabet of lines. It's a way that you can create kind of like a shape like that, where it kind of looks like a uh, what is it? Almost like a brick, but it has some sort of slot in it or hollow region to it. All right. And then extrude cut. So, and actually, let me see if I can screen share right now. Because if we can screen share, I'll just kind of go through some of the details of the extrusion. Let's see, so I'll do that. Let's see if this works. Hopefully it doesn't kick anybody out. Okay, cool. Is everybody able to see Solidworks? It looks like it is showing up, so that is a good sign for
Yeah, I
once.
can see it.
Perfect. All right, cool. So let's kind of talk just a little bit, or kind of go through some of the things that we just talked about, because it'll just be a more effective way of talking about it rather than me just babbling on until the end of the lecture and then kind of getting into how to work a lot of this stuff. So let's say we want to create kind of a similar shape that we discussed in some of those lecture slides. I'm just going to go to the front plane in this instance, and I'll click the sketch button. That's going to direct my view to the front plane. And what's nice, like I mentioned before, it already puts us normal to that plane. So we don't have to worry about perspective changes and whether or not it's actually truly what the shape is indicating. So I can go and click center rectangle, and just like I mentioned, it's kind of like a radius almost. Start it at the center, and then we can pull it out and basically indicate the direction in our X and Y coordinates. So what's cool is that from this screen right here, it's also indicating that we can choose different rectangle types directly from here. So let's say I wanted it to be a rectangle type of or rather a corner rectangle instead. I've already created one. Now if I want to create another rectangle where a corner rectangle would be more effective, then I can do that. Let's say I wanted to create something like this. It's a lot more effective doing it that way than trying to do a center rectangle. Control Z will just have you go back if you create unnecessary or unwanted shapes. So I've created my rectangle here, and as such, I want to dimension it. I want to make sure that nothing here is ambiguous. So I'm going to indicate that this is, let's just say 20. I have no idea what this is in right now. Let's say millimeters, and hopefully it agrees with me. Cool, so 20 millimeters. And then if I hit this side as well, it'll indicate 9.7, whatever, and I can just change it to 10 instead. So I have a pretty similar shape as to what I was dealing with before. And then I can just close out of that menu there. If I want to say, I just want to create an extrusion out of this. I already know that this is the shape that I want to extrude. This is kind of how I prefer to do it, but whichever way you guys want to do it. I'll just go over to the Features tab, hit Extrude Boss, and it'll already kind of create that that three-dimensional shape that we were just discussing. So pretty much the same shape, the same path that we had already taken. Um, and then, I mean, if we're just kind of going through some of these features, draft is pretty cool. I believe it defaults to inward. So this is just a good way of saying, hey, maybe I want to create something that's more of like a trapezoidal prism or something of the sort. Just any sort of shape that requires some sort of additional angle out of our extrusion. We can do that as well just by saying, hey, let's draft it. Or maybe it wants to be outward instead, anything like that. If I want to indicate a second direction, I would just click that button and it'll already create that extrusion. It's going to take on all of the same properties as our original direction, and we can't indicate for it to go in the other direction because what would be the point? We're already indicating, hey, I want one sort of profile on one side and a different profile on the other side. Let's say I didn't want to have a draft on this though. Let's say I just wanted it to be coming off of this shape. So if I just wanted some sort of geometry that looked like this, I would just leave it as such, hit the check mark, and it will create that geometry. What is nice, we can always edit our sketch. So uh, if I messed up a dimension, if there was some additional thing that I wanted to this, maybe it should have been 15 millimeters instead of 10. I can edit those sorts of things as well. The only thing I would have to do is you would just want to right click on your sketch plane, hit the sketch button, and it'll automatically sort of bring up kind of the necessary dimensions. It'll still be showing that ghost image of your extrusion until you make any sort of adjustments to it. But it's just a good way of still showing you kind of what's going on. So let's say instead I want this to be 15. So it will increase kind of the overall height. I hit select on that, and then since I'm still in the sketch plane, I would need to leave the sketch in some manner. So I'll leave the sketch, and then it'll re-render our 3D object here. So it's a bit fatter now, kind of closer to a more square shape. And then I'm not going to go too much into the PowerPoints. I'll just sort of show you guys. more specifically how to do the extrusion cut, but it's pretty similar to just creating an extrusion in general. Let's say in this instance now with this shape that I have, instead I want to create a hole in it, some sort of additional slot or screw hole necessary for whatever the heck I'm trying to do with this. So as we can sort of see now, calm down. As we can see, it's giving us other faces that we can work with. Moving the camera if you hold down the middle mouse button. So it's going to be a lot easier if you have a mouse, hopefully. So whatever your kind of third mouse button is, if you just hold that down, you're able to rotate it. If you hit Control and middle, you're able to just move it in plane. Scrolling in and out. Should have mentioned that a bit earlier. That would have been helpful, wouldn't it? Um, So let's say we want to create some sort of extrude cut on this object here, and I want to do it on the very top surface. So it's already giving me a bunch of other dimensions. A lot of these are just a reference to what happened with regard to the extrude cut. So it's kind of difficult to see because there's a lot of other kind of crap going on here. But we have an 18 degrees, which is the angle at which we gave this. It's indicating how far the extrusion was. And it's also just giving our other dimensions that we already know for that specified sketch plane. So if we click on this top surface, it will just generally highlight it, pretty similar to how we said that the light blue lines were going to be selected. Any sort of light blue surface is also going to indicate a selection. And just as we did before, we're going to want to sketch on this. So this is a bit easier if you, since you don't really have a specific plane right now, you have a surface. So in this instance, it'll be a whole lot easier if we just click on that designated surface that we want to create a sketch on, and then go back to our sketch tab and hit sketch. So it didn't really do a lot of it didn't really do much kind of like at face value, but it is indicating now that, hey, we have all of our sketch tools available to us. We can sketch on this plane now. One thing that I really like doing more often than not, let me see if it gives me that option. It doesn't, how dare it. Maybe it does. No, it doesn't. I like to be normal to this plane. So what we can do is we can indicate, or we can sort of select different ways of viewing our 3D object. So if we go up to the very top, it should be one of the middle buttons. It kind of looks like a cube with the front surface is blue. If we click on view orientation, it'll pull up all the different sides that we can view this in. So we still can move this around if we want a very specific direction that we want to look at it, any of our cardinal directions or anything kind of from a different angle, all of those can be indicated. And if we just sort of hover over and click on that selected side of kind of that like blown up cube, then we're able to just hone in on that specific direction. So now I'm normal to our top surface. We're looking down at this figure now. And it's still indicating that we want to sketch on it. So you can do the view orientation whether or not you're in the sketch menu. And let's say I want to create some sort of circular slot that is right kind of in the middle of this shape. If you are in line with other sorts of lines or geometries already present, usually you'll get this dotted line indicator. So this is not to be confused to say that this line is invisible or there's anything not visible right now. It's just a good way of lining up several figures, or several sketches rather. So let's say I want to line it up right here, more or less in the center. So I'll just click on the center of that and move outward. So pretty nice, pretty convenient. We're just indicating the center and the radius of this circle. Now we do want to smart dimension this because generally speaking, or rather, generally speaking, when you're creating your shapes, you're going to start with a relatively ambiguous length or radius or dimension. Um, What's nice is that on this left-hand side here with the parameters, it is already indicating, hey, this might not be the radius that you're actually trying to create. Would you like to indicate something else? So let's say I want it to just be 2 millimeters. So I'll just do 2 millimeters, and it will already set it to that. And then I'll just hit our check mark, our OK button. However, there are some things that are still ambiguous about this circle. One thing that I always like to do, regardless of whether I give that specific dimension, I always like to indicate the radius or diameter in this case still. Um, I like this just because it's just a good way of being able to keep all of whatever dimensions you know you want in the scene right there. Um, Also keep in mind, this symbol right here is referencing a diameter. So I gave a radius in the menu, however, it's giving a diameter. These things can be changed, but whenever you're looking at the e-drawings, always make sure to keep that in mind whenever that's present. So right here we have a diameter of 4. However, this line is still blue. It's still indicating that, hey, there's not something quite specific about this. And that's going to be its location on this surface in general. So really the only thing that we know about this circle is that it's completely in line with the origin. I believe by virtue of the right plane here, but that's not entirely necessary to know. We don't know how far it is from either of the edges. So what we need to do is we will indicate that, or we'll try to figure it out in some way. How do you assign dimensions again? Like you pointed out the diameter. Um, all of your dimensional assignments are typically going to be done through the Smart Dimension button. So your Smart Dimension is always going to be this button here at the top left of the screen, right next to Exit Sketch. That will generally be the way that you're going to want to indicate dimensions. Otherwise, if you just created that figure, you can always do so just from the menu that's on the left side of the screen. So it generally will give some sort of a menu that will allow you to change those dimensions. I personally like to use Smart Dimension because more often than not, the shape I create is not going to be the dimensions that I intend for it to be. So the one thing that I would say is that Smart Dimension is definitely going to be your friend. There are some other options in here as well, but usually just the general Smart Dimension is enough to get stuff done. So we do want to indicate how far it is from either of our cardinal directions. And we only need to indicate how far it is from one side and one base, I guess you could say. Doesn't really matter which one we pick. So what I'll do is I can just click on the arc of the circle, or rather just the side of the circle, and it's already telling me, hey, this has a diameter of 4. I already know that. It's not really necessary information, but if I hover over some other line, it'll put 2 and 2 together and recognize, hey, I'm trying to find out how far these two, or rather how far it is from the center of the circle to that side. So keep in mind, typically whenever you use your Smart Dimension tool on an arc, so any sort of curved line or yeah, just any sort of curved line, it's generally going to be wherever the start of that is. So even if it's not a full circle, if it's just an arc, it's always going to be kind of whatever the center of that radius is, or of that arc is. So if we just click again and kind of select, hey, I'm good with this dimension, this is what I want, it's saying, hey, we have a distance of 10 from the side, and then we can create a distance of, in this case it's indicating 5.2. I want it to just be 5. I want it to be in the dead center. We can do that as well. We would just have to verify, hey, I want it to be the 5, or a 5 millimeter dimension. And now we're actually in a much better place. As we can see, our line now is black, indicating that this shape here is fully defined. If we exit our sketch, we'll see that there's no issues with it. It's not saying it's over-defined or under-defined in any manner, so we don't have to worry about that. We're doing solid in that situation. Um, and now we want to do an extrude cut. So as I mentioned, we want to make sure that this has a hole going directly through it. So from the start down to the base. What we can do, I typically like to just click on the sketch. I don't know if that actually always selects it. Yes, it does. Oh, I clicked on the wrong button. We want to go to extrude cut. So extrude cut is going to be a couple tools to the right of our extrude boss. Kind of looks like a hollow cube or a hollow rectangle. So when we click on that, it'll recognize, hey, we're trying to take part of whatever this shape is out of the equation in reference to or starting from that sketch plane. So here, it's just going to start at that sketch plane, and whenever it's indicating blind or whenever it says blind, it's typically going to go through the entire length of the shape itself or through the geometry itself. So here we have that it's starting on that very top, and it's actually not necessarily ending up right at the very bottom. And that's because, if you remember, we made this a height of 15, so it's only going 10 millimeters deep into this geometry. I wanted to go through the entire thing, so I have two options. One option is I could just crank up whatever the distance is. Um, this is totally fine. Just keep in mind that if you have other stuff behind this shape or on the other side of your geometry, it might make things messy. You might end up cutting more away than what you want to. And that's why it might be a little bit more preferable if we explore some of our options. So we have a couple new options now when we're dealing with extrude cut. So we have through all both, up to next. Those ones are generally going to be our new ones. So through all is just going to indicate that it's going to go the entire duration through that surface. Both is going to do on both sides of it. So if there is some other thing, or rather, let's say you're not starting this sketch out on a surface. Let's say you're doing it inside of some sort of shape, and you need to create this hole on both sides of your sketch plane. So this is kind of like the two dimension. As we can see, it already selected the direction 2. But if we click off of it, I believe it gets rid of it. Yeah, or I could just get rid of it like right there. And then up to next is just going to go up to the next surface that it sees. So through all is indicating it'll go through the entire geometry. I believe up to next means that it's just going to go to the next surface that it'll come in contact with. But we just want to make sure that it goes through the entire shape. So if I want to, I'll just indicate that, and then I can hit select, and we have our screw hole or slot or whatever the intention of this uh, empty cylinder is supposed to be. Um, let's say I messed up. Let's say I wanted to choose some different option here. That is also completely fine. What we would want to do, kind of similar to if we wanted to edit the sketch in any sort of way, we're going to want to right click on our feature, and it will be the top left button, edit feature. So this will allow us to change up what details on that feature menu we want to adjust. So let's say I actually wanted to draft this shape instead. I wanted to make it kind of more of a more of like a conical shape, perhaps. And the reason that it's not showing up anything is that 18 degrees would actually, I think it would not do it justice. Yeah, that's right. It would kind of cut out whatever the profile would be on the other side. So, but here we can tell, I mean, even if we look at it from this angle here, or this side rather, we can tell that the profile on this side is not the same size as where we started. So there is going to be a 4-degree inward slope from the origin, that initial sketch plane, to the other side of the shape. So let's say I wanted to make it 5 millimeters, or 5 degrees, excuse me, something where it kind of slopes down inward into the shape. And then I hit select, and we can see that it does make that shape kind of more conical, as I mentioned. We can take a cross section of this, so kind of more on the left side, you'll see it's fourth from the left. If you hit the section tool, it'll allow you to create a section of this plane and see sort of what's going on. We can make adjustments, we can pull this up just a little bit more, then hit select, and then we're able to see that profile. So it's not getting rid of any of the geometry there, it's just showing you how the geometry looks from that cross-sectional plane. As you can see, it's not really making anything in the feature manager, and we can already tell that it's that boss is still here, indicated by these blue kind of wires on the outside. And if we want to get rid of this section plane, we can just hit the section button one more time and it'll automatically get rid of it. So by and large, the majority of what you can do with regard to SolidWorks, a lot of it does give you a lot of room, a lot of wiggle room to work with. In fact, there's one thing in the slides that I didn't go through. Let's say we wanted to only keep what that extrusion would be, that extrude cut will be. So instead of cutting out the indicated shape or sketch, we're going to cut out everything else that is on that sketch plane. So we would want to hit the flip side to cut button. And what that's going to do is it's going to remove everything below that sketch plane except for whatever was sketched. So in fact, I don't know why this looks like it's bigger. Oh, because it's flipping it on the outside, so it's technically inverting the draft as well. So what this is going to look like is it's pretty much going to be more of like a kind of like a cone as well, only it's drafted inward. So there's various different things that you can do, and honestly a variety of different ways that you can accomplish the same goal. Sometimes rather than doing an extrusion, you or rather than doing an extrude cut, you can just do an extrusion instead. So these are all different ways that you can sort of utilize some of these features for not just one purpose. And I think that by and large covers most of the things that were in the lecture as well. So the lecture is going to be there if you guys have any questions regarding anything specific on the lecture. I do want to keep most of the focus right now on SolidWorks just because we're going to start getting more into the in-class assignment portion of things. So before we continue, are there any questions about anything? If you want, some of you guys can open up your mics too. I don't really mind that much as long as it's not too crazy or there's any background noise or anything.
I had a question.
Yeah, what's up?
When you were looking at the after the last extrusion before this one, you kind of showed the inside of the object that you had cut a hole in.
Yes, so the cross
How did you?
section.
Yeah, how did you get to that again?
So
Sorry.
I'll go through that one more time. So basically, and I kind of like, or rather I don't like whatever that shape is. So I'll just make it so that it was this so we can kind of see things a little bit better. We have this cross-section tool kind of at the top. It says section view. It is the fourth option from the left on kind of that top graphic menu. When you click on that, it will typically automatically assign some form of a section plane. However, you can make adjustments to this however you choose. So these other orange semicircles are just there to indicate, hey, maybe I want to start. Oh God, that's not what I wanted. Maybe I want to just sort of tilt it in one direction or another, or perhaps I just want to continue moving this cross-sectional view um, in the indicated plane direction. There's all sorts of different options on the left in kind of this section view menu. Um, I wouldn't go too much into that. Um, I believe, yeah, where it's indicating section one, that's really just showing that we only have one section plane that's here, and those three buttons that are kind of right below section one are just indicating the origin of that section plane. There's also kind of very similar buttons and notations like reverse direction. So this is just going to show the other side of the shape now. And then it gives angles in the X and Y direction as well. I like to keep it as just 0 degrees just so that everything is uh, parallel to each other. But if I wanted to, I could cut it from the right plane instead. So it's kind of nice is that just clicking on those buttons is just going to show you or indicate uh, where that cross-section plane is actually starting from. Having trouble aligning things center again and also swapping sketches to a new plane. Um, okay, cool. Usually, I would say you're going to want to stick to one plane until you make some form of an extrusion. Um, and then beyond that, you can sort of start sketching on either of those other indicated planes. You can create other planes to work on other than the front, top, and right, as well as plenty other geometry types as well. So one nice thing, and we'll start getting into this a bit more later, is that we have a reference geometry section. And this is going to be a lot of your very basic geometry that we deal with. So planes, axes, if you want to create another coordinate system to reference a shape or a sketch to, you're able to do that. Mate references is really going to be relevant once we start getting into assemblies. So you don't really need to work or be concerned too much with that. And also keep in mind that all of these extrusions or extrude cuts, or a lot of everything that's done within SolidWorks, is pretty darn good at creating surfaces and faces out of um, whatever sort of feature you create. So what's nice here is that this is all one surface. It's a strange surface, and it's clearly not very linear, but it is a uniform surface. So that does really benefit you, especially once you start getting into more complex stuff, where there might be lots more faces to have to deal with that become a headache. SolidWorks is pretty good at indicating, hey, this thing right here is all one piece. So you don't have to be concerned with several different pieces or several different surfaces on a single geometry that are by and large unnecessary. Um, any other questions before we start going on to the in-class assignment stuff? And hopefully everyone has, in some capacity, either been following along using SolidWorks. I want to make sure that everybody here or not here has access to SolidWorks right now. Nobody is just watching and staring and not having anything to kind of demo as well. This is, by and large, much more an interactive kind of thing to work with. So it's a lot easier to follow along or just mess around with it and kind of understand what does what rather than just looking at the lecture slides and then having all the knowledge and understanding how everything works. Okay. So if that is all, or if nobody has any other questions right now, what I would like to do is I do want to start getting on to the in-class assignments pretty soon. So there is 2 of them, and both of them are on Canvas as well. So that is a good question. It depends. So one of the things, and I hate posing it like this, but because I'm I don't think any of us as engineers are really a huge fan of doing stuff in inches or pounds or any of that. It becomes a little bit of a pain, but sometimes you might get measurements that are in those units. And it's not as easy when you have a drawing that has 20 different measurements on it or more to look at it and convert every single one of them either from inches to SI or from SI to inches, pounds, seconds. So I will always indicate whether or not something is in millimeters or something is in inches. But if I do add those things, make sure that you guys are working with those measurements. It's really only a click of a button with regard to the software. The one thing that you guys do need to do is make sure that what you are working with is either inches or pounds, or rather inches or millimeters. Because if you go into uh, uh, if you start working through this and then you realize, crap, it said 5 inches instead of 5 millimeters, you're going to have to go back and kind of redo some of those measurements because clicking that button doesn't flip those measurements, it flips just how they're referenced. Go through the solid, or is it a blind cut? That's a good question. It goes through the entire shape. It is a 5 millimeter hole through that block on homework 1. Or rather, it goes through the entire shape. I don't know how deep the object is. I think it's like 10 millimeters. But it does I believe the 5 millimeters is referencing the diameter. I can't remember off the top of my head. So if I'm in inches and pounds, how do I switch that? So that button is going to be indicated on the bottom right of the software. So it might say something along the lines of like custom units. If it does say that on the bottom right, you can switch that to MMGS, which is going to be your millimeters, grams, seconds. IPS is inches, pounds, seconds. So always make sure that you're checking those sorts of things. Um, I'll make sure to always write that in the future. Uh, it is in inches. On those documents, I'll kind of talk a little bit about that as well. I'll just kind of show you guys. I might have to switch the window. Yeah, I'll just kind of give you a breakdown of how the e-drawings work as well. So let's say I wanted to just make a drawing from the shape that I already have or the part that I already have. If I go to File and then kind of about a third of the way down the menu, you'll see Make Drawing from Part. When you click on this, it will ask you to save the file. I'll just save it just for reference. Part 1, doesn't really matter. And then it'll open up the menu where you have your parts, assemblies, and drawings. So just click on Drawing, and it should allow you to open up. It will give you sheet format sizes. We don't really need to go much into that right now, so you can just keep the typical A landscape sheet and then hit OK on that. And what that'll do, it'll allow you to bring any of your shapes or any of your parts over to this menu. Let me see, is it streaming this as well? Yes, it is. Okay, good. If you see on the right side, you'll see kind of all the different angles that you can see your shape in. Typically, most of your shapes will be or will show in isometric, which is just kind of that, like if you're staring directly at the center of your XYZ axis. But then from here, you can indicate other views as well. So the reason I brought this up is that kind of in the center, it will say dimensions are in inches, unless specified otherwise. So typically the dimensions will be in inches if there isn't a specification already there. But I will try to, even on homework as well, until maybe we start getting further into the semester, um, I'll try to make sure that it says whether or not the dimensions are in inches or if they're in millimeters, and also material properties as well. Material properties will be assigned through the kind of that features tree. I'll kind of show you that as well. That will be necessary for the homework. So I'm just going to exit out of this sheet, and your material properties is going to be right here. So it's right above where it references your planes. So you have your front, top, and right above that it'll say material, not specified. So if you right click on it and hit edit material, it'll give you a whole big library of all the different materials that SolidWorks already has in place. Um, I don't even think in the version that I had previously it had a search bar, but that's pretty awesome. So I'll also indicate whatever the material is. I think I do have that referenced on the first homework assignment. Um, so if you're looking for, say, alloy steel, you can just type in alloy steel. It's already right here. Click apply, and it will assign that material to your part. And then you'll just close out of this menu. And now we have whatever the heck this thing is in alloy steel. I think that's a reasonable overview of most of the things that you guys will be required for the in-class assignment and the homework. Obviously, so two things. If you guys haven't already started yet, we have about an hour and 10 minutes left for, wait, no, we have longer than that because we go to 8:30. So we have an hour and like 40 minutes still left. So all the lecture stuff is done, but I'm still going to be hanging out until all you guys are all done, or all you guys want to head out, or if you finish the in-class assignments. So I want you guys to work on the in-class assignments right now. I'll be hanging out, and if there's any questions about anything, just put them in the lecture text, whether it's something that I missed, if it's something that we haven't really gone through quite yet, or if it's something that I might have glossed over or went through too quickly. I do want you guys going through those right now. We'll be pretty lenient today, so I mean, if any of you guys are like having a bit of a struggle with any of that stuff, obviously I'm not just gonna peace out. Like I do want to clarify all of those questions so you guys leave tonight and are finished and have a good idea on how to do those in-class assignments following into the homework. So I don't think that any of the stuff that I went through today um, or rather, any of the stuff for the in-class assignments is beyond what is necessary for homework one and the two in-class assignments. I would like so here's the deal. Uh, I want the in-class assignments to be done by tonight, so by midnight tonight. I think the Canvas upload is set for then. If you guys are still having issues, I can extend that. I don't want to penalize you guys if I did a bad job explaining things, or because I did a bad job explaining things. So that is definitely subject to change. Um, Depending on how you guys are feeling about the in-class assignments. Um, Upload an assembly file with sheet or just the PDF. I would like you to upload the SolidWorks part. So I'll make a note of that for both the homework as well as future in-class assignments. You guys should be able to upload a SolidWorks part to Canvas. I'm going to Google that right now because I don't want to lie to you.
I'll try to turn it in really quick.
Okay. Yeah, and the upload limit is indefinite, so you guys, it's not like it's only one upload.
And so we don't need to do the sheet with all of the defined dimensions. We just need the part.
Just the part.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep. Do make sure that you guys are making sure that all of your stuff is defined. So I'll be able, I mean, clearly, kind of like what we talked about with defining your parts, it will be, I wouldn't say easy to see, but it will be able to see whether or not everything is defined on all of the sketches that you make. So just make sure that those things are, all those measurements are there, nothing's really being left out. Yes, so there's two of them. So there should be an in-class 1A and an in-class 1B. If you are struggling because that is a late lab, um, we can work something out. Really, the point of the in-class assignments being done the day of, or the night of, I guess you could say, is just to make sure that when you guys leave or are finished up tonight by about 8:30ish, if it ever lasts that long, you're not leaving and you're just like, I have no idea how to do some of these assignments. Even if we have to talk about it for like an extra period of time, I want to make sure that you guys are understanding how to use these tools because they are helpful, and you will likely be using SolidWorks for other engineering classes as well, especially any of the design related ones. I know a couple kind of deal more with like utilizing software or any of those. Closed off. Let me check Canvas. There should only be an in-class 1A and an in-class 1B. I don't think there shouldn't be any 2B that's already there. Shouldn't be. Are you perhaps in a different section, Trace? Because I know one of the other TAs has a lot of their stuff already prepared. It's just not actually, some of it isn't already published. What do you mean by format sheet, Alan? Do you mean like for the drawings? So this is section 5. This is 1005. So you might have been switched over to one of those sections instead. So for section 5, the let me see. I can't remember the TA if it's Mosin or Puya. So the TA for that section is Mosen. So that's on Wednesdays. So I would suggest reaching out to him. Send him an email and definitely talk things through with him, because I know that things were a little bit, yeah, I know that things are a little bit strange with regard to how you showed up in Canvas. Um, Let me see. So here, let me get you his email and such. Yeah, here. Send an email to him and possibly to who is it? To Joan Conway, about the mix-up. She's usually pretty good at uh, helping out literally everything engineering related, with regard to scheduling or classes or any of the where to stuff. And with regard to some of the other questions that I'm seeing, you guys don't need to worry about the e-drawing sheets. You can choose any one. I typically just choose the A landscape one, I believe it's called. That's not going to be necessary. I really just want you guys uploading the parts this time around, and then we'll go into the drawings a bit more later.
I finished the first one that's basically like the circle and the box like
Yeah.
cut through. But I'm having a hard time like just giving out the dimensions. So do you just want like the part itself, or do you want like the part and its dimensions? Because I'm trying to figure that part out.
Explain one more time what you're
Okay.
asking
So
about.
I've already extruded it and did all the measurements while I was doing like the sketches. But then when I did the extrusion, it basically uh, got rid of all the dimensions that I put down, and I can't really put them back onto the extruded. So it's basically
So it
not
got.
showing the dimensions.
Oh, I see. Some of those dimensions should still be embedded within the sketches. I would take it.
Yeah.
So if that stuff is there, you don't have to smart dimensions the 3D objects themselves. Just because I'll be able to take a look at your sketches, what features you're using, and sort of the details behind your features, and get a better sense of how you did on the assignment. So I'm mostly basing it upon if you guys are able to look at the dimensions and apply that to the specific features, or utilize the features such that you're applying those specific dimensions. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, you can use smart dimension outside of that on shapes that have already been created, uh, or in any sort of what is it? On any of yeah, any of the shapes that you've already created, you can smart dimension them already. Sometimes it's a little bit finicky, um, but usually you want to just smart dimension your sketches, and
Okay.
that will kind of assign things properly. In fact, here, what I'll do, I do still have my stream up. Am I still? Yes, cool. So what I'll do as well, I'll pull up the first, or rather I'll just pull up both. I'll pull up both of the parts for you guys just via the stream. And then what I can do, or rather, if you guys need any adjustments with regard to how you're seeing those figures already, I can adjust them on the stream just so you guys will have a little bit better view of maybe certain things that I may have left out. I might do that, so I apologize in advance. So let me see. So that's the second one. Yeah. So this is the shape for the very first one. However, nope. If we look at it from kind of the opposite view, that I believe it's a 1x1 hole doesn't necessarily go through the entire thing. It only goes through one side, and it is just a perfectly aligned hole that goes through it. Hopefully that maybe clarifies things a little bit more. So once you switch the dimensions either from IPS to MMGS, either way, it will automatically make sure all the dimensions, whether they've been assigned or not, are of that specific designation. So let's say I had already assigned something to be 5 millimeters. Well, then if I switch it to IPS, it's going to no longer say that that dimension is 5 millimeters. It's going to say that it's whatever it is, like 12 inches or something. Or I think I'm going backwards, but it's going to change any dimensions that have already been assigned. But once you make that flip, all further dimensions shown will indicate that it'll indicate that specific unit. So if you flip on over to IPS, all of the dimensions from there on out will be in terms of inches or pounds or seconds. And changing dimensions is going to be the button at the bottom right. So it should say MMGS or IPS. When you make that change, it will flip all the given dimensions. So what's cool is that just like how you were able to. So, well, here's the first thing. Um, the first thing I would probably say, which I feel like most of you probably already have an idea about, is that that little square hole that only goes through one side is it has to go all the way through just one of the sides. So I'm indicating it. I have it shown on the screen as well, or on the stream. Um, there's no hole on the, I guess you could say, left side, but on the right side, the hole does go all the way through until it reaches this kind of curved region. And then, so Nathan, uh, I I feel like pretty much everybody at least probably has some understanding that for a shape like this, you want to create kind of the box with the half cylinder cut out of it first. The next thing that you're going to want to do though is you do want to um, draw on one of those surfaces. So, I mean, if we're taking a look at the stream, one surface is clearly easier to work with than the other. At least if we're considering the two surfaces that we could be working with, or that we could be creating an extrude cut through. Um, after we get the half pipe shape, we're going to go through the shape that has already been cut out. So, real quick, Nicholas. So, um, is there a way to go through and get the dimension on a shape that has already been cut out? I believe if you do smart dimension on a specific region, sometimes it's a bit finicky with a lot of the three-dimensional parts to it. Usually, if I'm thinking about it correctly, the one problem with doing that I tend to notice is that usually if you are trying to get a dimension on a shape that's like already been cut out or anything like that, the dimension has already been determined in some way. So you might have to make adjustments with your sketches or, yeah, like your two-dimensional sketches before making any adjustments to the three-dimensional geometry. Um, the second one is supposed to be IPS, correct? So the second assignment will be in inches, pounds, seconds. Do the holes in the second assignment go all the way through as well? Yes, they do. So it will go from the top of that surface down to the very base of it. And then how do I make the shape from the lines? What do you mean by that, Alan? If you could explain that just a little more. So I would probably make two recommendations, at least for the first assignment. And if you're paying attention to my uh, feature tree, you can kind of get a slight idea as to what I did. Um, One way that you could think about this shape is that if you're not considering this extrusion here, or rather this cut that goes through the right side of the half pipe, you really just have a rectangle with a piece cut out of it. So that's one approach you can take. One approach is starting from a box of material, or an entire piece of material, and then cutting out this half pipe shape. Another way that you could also think about it is that this face right here is fairly indistinguishable from uh, just a normal sketch. So what I mean by that is that this sketch right here, so long as you know what all the dimensions are and can kind of piece them together, this side of it can just be an extruded sketch. So those are two different ways that you can approach this. That's what's kind of cool about SolidWorks. There's a ton of different ways on how to actually do these problems. So try to consider those as two different ways of actually doing or making this half pipe shape. Is the second in-class assignment supposed to be inches or just the second homework assignment? I know I labeled them more precisely on the homework. The second in-class assignment is in inches. So it does briefly say so, or I know I kind of briefly went over it. On the drawing, it always indicates, and that's just, I believe, how the drawings function. It always references that the drawings are going to be in inches unless specified otherwise. I'll try my best to make sure that that specification is always there, regardless of whether it's in inches or not. Let's see. For the second assignment, I see that the overall depth is 1.7. Should the overall be 1.8? Let me take a look at that. Wonder if that actually is a little bit off center. Or maybe it was some weird rounding error. Let me take a look at that, actually. With regard to the second in-class assignment. That is a bit interesting. I wasn't aware of that. So something I just thought of, smart dimensioning is going to be much easier to do if you are working with sketch planes. So work with a sketch plane first, or try to turn whatever you're working with into a sketch plane, whether it be a surface or otherwise, and then try to smart dimension certain things. That probably will alleviate some issues that might be had whenever there's like some sort of shape that you want to make adjustments with in 3D. How do you turn something into a sketch plane? So if you're just trying to turn a specific surface into a sketch plane, if that's what you're asking about, all you really need to do is you just want to click on that surface, go to your sketch tab, and hit the sketch button. It doesn't look like it does anything, but now that is an entire plane. So it's actually not just restricted to that surface, it is quite literally a plane. So if I want to, I can sketch something totally out here in the woods and just make a cylinder or a circle, I guess you could say, first of all, that is in line with that surface. So it will be coplanar, I guess you could say. For the first assignment, how do you make the circle equidistant on both sides? Are you talking about the homework, Ronaldo, or the in-class assignment? Oh, I see. That's also a good question. There's a couple different ways that you could do that. So here, I will open up a different sketch, or drawing rather. No, sketch part. New art. So there's a couple different ways. So for anybody who wants to watch, let's say I just want to sketch on the front plane. And I'm just going to create so I can create other geometry or other two-dimensional geometry based on this figure on it or around it. One way of doing it, so one thing that you just need to be careful about is that sometimes you might assign or place another sketch, be it a cylinder, in maybe in a specific place. So usually whenever you see these dots, this yellow one here is indicating that it is the midpoint. So if I start there and I just continue that sketch, it's going to make sure that this circle has a center on the midpoint. So it's already centered on the center of this top line. But let's say I just started off on the side. Let's say I knew what the dimension was. I didn't feel like putting it in the center. I just wanted to put it off to the side. That can be accomplished as well. The one thing that I would have to do is make sure to smart dimension it with respect to that given side. It's going to say 25, but I want it to be in the center. So I want it to be dead center like that. So there's a whole bunch of ways. SolidWorks does provide some ways here and there, kind of like what I said, how it gives you the option of selecting the midpoint, and it does, generally speaking, snap to the midpoint. Let me go back to that. But if it doesn't, let's say it's just very slightly off, and you accidentally clicked it, or it put the it put the sketch down anyway, or the geometry down anyway, you can still either back up, so just Control Z and get rid of whatever geometry you just made, or you can work with it. You can make certain adjustments. Kind of as a proof of concept, right now it doesn't. So I know I briefly mentioned this before. but if I do start right on the midpoint, it already has a relation at that point, at that center. So if I kind of hit escape such that I'm not still using the circle tool, and then I click directly on that center midpoint, it's already telling me some details about it. So if I'm thinking about this correctly, it's already saying that this circle is on the midpoint of this line. Now, it might do it. Yeah. So this is an instance where we have an over-defined sketch. So you'll usually see some dimension go yellow and this pop-up will appear. So it says make dimension driven. This usually is referencing, kind of like what we talked about before, how this dimension, this 50, I can't change it. It's locked as that dimension because we made the center on the midpoint of that line. If I wanted to change that, I would have to click on the center one more time, and then it says existing relations. These can be adjusted if I want to. If I don't want this relation, if I don't want it to be the midpoint, or rather that circle, the center of that circle to be the midpoint, I can just hit delete, and then I can hit OK. Now the location is arbitrary, and it's still yelling at me a little bit, but if I delete that dimension, so just hit delete when you have that smart dimension selected, I should be able to adjust this now. So if I want it to be more to the left, 75 millimeters from this side, I can do that as well. I think in order to define it, no, that underdefines it. It might want to be defined from that side as well. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky to, oh, it's because I didn't assign a radius, duh. Yeah, so let's say I want this to have a radius of like 10 instead. So now I should have, that's not what I wanted. I should have a relatively defined sketch. It's still saying that it's underdefined, but it should be good otherwise. I don't quite know why that one is underdefined still. It might just be some relations on the inside of this circle. Sometimes it's a bit finicky. Definitely try your best to always make sure that things are fully defined if you can. Sometimes there will be underdefined sketches, but it's far better for it to be underdefined than overdefined, just because sometimes those overdefined sketches can create other issues with regard to just whether or not the software wants to behave. Not sure. You guys don't need to make the drawings, not this time around. So I primarily just want you guys to submit the part. We might talk a little bit more about drawings next time, and kind of get a little bit deeper into that topic. And then from there, I might ask you guys to do some drawings. But for the time being, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't require you guys to do the drawings now for both the in-class assignment or this first homework. I'm really just after you submitting the part. And then I can kind of gauge things from there. So if you guys could just make sure that your name is at least on that file when you submit it, just so that it's easy enough to reference and open, that's preferable. Nope, just the part. You guys don't need to go too crazy with the drawings. I have no idea if the other classes are doing the drawings quite yet in terms of submission. And I do want you guys to understand and at least be comfortable with how to do the drawings. The smart dimension aspect of it is very similar to what you're going to see when you're just working with the part itself. But the drawings aren't necessary for this first lecture or the first homework. So let me explain a little bit, um, and I can kind of see where the confusion is, Nicholas. Uh, I'm guessing you're talking about the 2.5 on the left hand side. Um, I want you to just, or for anybody else who might still be struggling a little bit with this, I want you to just pay attention to if that half pipe shape wasn't cut out, what would be that side length? And then considering if you have that half pipe with a radius of 5 cut out of it, how far, or rather, what would the dimensions of the two sides on both the left and the right would be? We already know that the left kind of flat surface of the half pipe is 2.5. I didn't add a measurement to the other one, but you can find it out if we know that the radius of that half pipe already is 5. So I guess more so what I'm trying to say is that don't really be so much concerned with those measurements. Make sure that the measurements of your sketch is correct. Just because trying to smart dimension things once it's already been, or once it's already become a 3D figure tends to be a little bit trickier. So try to make sure that everything in your sketches is defined and coherent. I guess the best way that I would probably put it is kind of similar to, or at least one manner of how to do it. Let me flip to the correct one. Kind of like what I was doing here. Try to make something, or you could try to make something like this. Uh, Let me explain some other features. You can also trim stuff. So if I want to trim away specific edges, say like this top part of the circle, I don't want that in the extrusion, I would just click on that top arc. And then perhaps I might want to click away that top connecting line, and then I just get an arc on the inside. And then from here, it's still referencing how the radius, or rather the diameter, of the circle that would be there would be 15, and that the center of that arc is 75 millimeters, I'm guessing, away from the right side. But I can change that if I need to. I can adjust that back. Another thing that you could do as well is you can also just make some of these half shapes, say like 3-point arcs. So if I want to create maybe some sort of an arc out of a shape like that, I can just immediately create that shape. If you want the dimensions to be on the drawing, you don't necessarily have to smart dimension things. Creating dimensions on the drawing is a lot easier, admittedly, just because it doesn't come with as many restrictions. So I guess my advice would be try to make your sketch, or try to make a single sketch plane first, as accurate as it is to whatever it looks from one of those normal views. And then you can sort of play around more with any of the extrusions uh, or extrude cuts, or kind of uh, editing your geometry in any sort of way. The first problem, how do you move it around? How do I move it to 1.5 inches? So real quick, so Nathan, when you say, so how do you move it to 1.5 inches? So I would recommend that once you've created that base shape, the half pipe without that extrude cut through it, you're going to want to go back to your sketch or create a sketch on a flat surface, preferably. So once you've created or once you've selected a surface to sketch on, use that and use all the dimensions, or rather use the smart dimensions with references that are already there. So, and here I'll kind of give you a little bit of a sense of what I'm talking about. Let me just do something like this, something that's kind of similar. And I'll just smart dimension this guy as well. So let's say I extrude this. Let's do 50 millimeters. And I create this shape. So something that's pretty similar. I'll do it from this side. If I select, and it gives a lot of the dimensions, it's already shown, we don't really have to worry too much about that. If I'm selecting on a face, and then, so I right click, and then I hit sketch, it will allow me to sketch on this flat surface. But keep in mind, that from this angle, we do have dimensions that are already there. I already know that like this side is defined as 50. It won't let me select it because I believe it's already defined, and it's already angry at me considering it's already a defined feature, but I can use these sides as reference points as well. Just as maybe if I was sketching on this plane instead, so if I exit sketch, if I decide to sketch on this plane, I could do things in reference to these half circles. So let's say I have maybe another circle that I want to add to this plane. Let's say I want these things to be in line with each other. There's two different ways that I could do it. One way is that Smart Dimension's actually pretty cool. It'll give different measurements depending on how you're doing it. But it's already saying right here that it's 15.9 whatever. If I just hit 0, it'll put it right in line with that circle. Similarly, I can just reference whatever the actual diameter or radius. Let's just say that this is 12. And maybe I want it some distance from the bottom now. So let's say I want it to be 25 millimeters from the bottom. Now I have a fully defined sketch because I said how far it was from the base. I said that it needed to be 0 millimeters away from this half circle, and I gave the radius. So all of those things are satisfied. Basically, I mean, sometimes it might say, well, you didn't make a measurement from here to here, or kind of like a horizontal measurement, but that's already a driven dimension. That is to say, it already knows from previous sketches that this cutout right here, this like half cylinder cutout, is 50 millimeters away from the side. So there's no reason I need to define this in terms of the side. I could if I want to, but if I already wanted it to be in line with some other feature, I can just say, hey, those things are a distance of 0 away from each other. Another way that you can do this is by creating other constraints. So kind of little restrictions or constraints to say, hey, we need these things to satisfy some sort of condition. And usually that will pop up when you control select two different sketch lines or curves. So like, let's say that, let's say that this was back where it was. So I'm just Control Z. So I'm going to get rid of that dimension. So it's like we just started again. So I'm going to define this as 12 one more time. And I'm going to define how far it is from the bottom as 25 one more time. But rather than just saying, hey, I want it to be completely in line, so the centers need to be 0 units away from each other. If and I think I can do it. It might be a little bit tricky on something like this, but I think if I click on both of the arcs, I would need a center. So I mean, one thing that I could do, I think I can create just a point here. Let me see. Or maybe even if I just created another arc, and then something that I would just delete later on. I could say that this center and this center are vertical with each other, and that will automatically define how far it is, or how far this circle is from either side, or the centers are in reference to each other. And then if I don't want this arc anymore, which it's not hurting anything, but I might just not want it on my sketch, I can just delete it, and it should still reference things. It might make it, in this case, so that it's no longer defined, because now it doesn't have a reference point. I think it got rid of the point that was in the middle here as well. But you can always just smart dimension those sorts of things if you don't already know what they are. And now it would be fully defined again. You don't need to submit the drawings as well. Later on, maybe, so later on as in like further in-class assignments or further homeworks, but I don't want the drawing to be like a major part of things quite yet. I just wanted to make sure that you guys kind of saw it, are familiar with it, so it didn't come up as a total surprise or anything like that. Is it possible to do that once the extrusion cut has already been made? Could you explain that one more time, Nathaniel? So that's a good question. You could. I would say the best way to move an extrusion cut is to move what the original sketch is. So let's say I want to extrude this. So everything's already fully defined here. I want to do an extrude cut on it. So I'll just say, okay, I want it to go through the entire thing. It's already 50 millimeters, so it'll go through the whole length of this part. And then the manufacturer or whoever said, we want it to be a little bit more to the side. We want it to be 5 millimeters further to the left, or 5 millimeters further from the right side. What we can do is, if you click on that little drop down, so this is where it's a little bit important to kind of understand what's what in your feature tree. But usually things are pretty defined. When you hover over specific features, it'll outline what that feature is in reference to in orange. So when I hold over or mouse over the Boss Extrude 1, and you can rename things, I think you just right click and then rename, I just saw it. No, yeah, rename tree item. You can do that and it'll rename things. I believe that. And if you hit I think if you double click it as well. So it will reference uh, what these features are with an outline. But let's say we want, back on topic, let's say we wanted to move this circle, or rather this hollow cylinder, over a little bit more. If I click the drop down menu for that specific feature, it will show me what the specific sketch is. So then I can just right click on it and then hit edit sketch. And this will allow me to change up that dimension a little bit. So just like we said, we wanted to move it 5 millimeters further to the left. If I hit enter, it will move it automatically. It'll get rid of that ghost feature that it typically shows up, but the second you hit or get rid of that menu, and then when you exit out of your sketch, it'll move things over and it'll redefine the feature. So you can move things around as necessary. You primarily want to move your sketch around, though. If we're finished with the, yep. Yeah, so if you guys are all done with the in-class assignments, you've already submitted the SolidWorks part, you don't need to hang around for any longer. This video is still going to go up on Web Campus, just so you guys are able to watch it, or for anybody who's not here, able to watch it. But yeah, I'm still going to be here for another 45 minutes, unless there's nobody else in the class. Triangle sketch. Yeah, so, I mean, if you want to do something like that, I'm opening up so many parts, holy cow. It might be a little bit trickier. I don't think that there's really no, like, specific part for it, or rather sketch tool for it, just because there's so much more variation to it. But let's say you wanted to just make a basic triangle, or something that has a triangular profile. You're typically going to be wanting your line tool. Either your line tool or your rectangle tool are probably going to be your best friends. I haven't played around with polygon that much, so honestly that might do it, maybe? Holy cow, you can make something like that as well, I think. Can you? I have actually no idea. Ha, that's awesome. So you can make super easy equilateral triangles as well. Today I learned. The other way of doing this would literally just be using the line tool. And then you would just create a 3-sided object, and then you can smart dimension everything appropriately. Come on, behave. And be a little bit careful with things like this. So keep in mind, this is completely just the horizontal distance. It's not actually referencing whatever the length of that side is. So that's one thing that you do have to be a little bit careful about when you're dealing with things that are slanted in some manner or another. So you might want to kind of be very careful with how you're smart dimensioning things, as opposed to just doing it all willy-nilly, because those are two completely different measurements. If you want to do angles as well, which you can do, I would just click on both of those two different sides, and it will automatically define that angle as some degrees. So let's say I wanted this one to be 60. Watch me make some sort of really poor triangle. Yeah, something like that, where it's already defined. So if I got rid of some of these measurements, I could make it a whole lot sillier, I'm sure. So I can make this as like 89. And it'll just automatically adjust other measurements. So just things to kind of keep in mind whenever you're smart dimensioning things. Just how it functions, and sort of definitely make sure that things are fully defined, but also try not to over define things as well, because that could lead to the program yelling at you for one small dimension that you might end up making. Yeah, so I'd say probably the important ones that you guys are going to need for both The in-class assignments, or rather ones that you can use for the in-class assignments, are going to primarily be your line tool, your circle tool, your 3-point arc maybe sometimes, and your corner rectangle, or just your rectangle tool. Polygon is pretty nice. I've hardly used it, as y'all can probably tell by my surprise, but it's just another thing to sort of play around with whenever you get the chance to, and just kind of mess around with things and see how they work.
Hey, Ethan.
Yes.
I messaged you, but maybe you didn't see
I,
it.
I just replied to it. Sorry, it took a second
Oh,
there.
you did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
But so I'm okay to go right now.
Yeah, you're fine to go.
That's,
For everybody who's already still here, and I'll send out um, another notice of this. I know a lot of you guys are still kind of getting acclimated to the software and making sure it works, and kind of just getting the hang of how it works. Um, I'm probably going to end up extending the deadline for the in-class assignment to at least tomorrow night, just in case you guys are still having some issues. I'll stick around as long as you guys want, even a little bit past 8:30 if you guys want to, or if you still have questions. Um, Especially considering I'm always available here on Discord if you guys need me. Um, or if you guys have other stuff going on. I know some of you guys have like labs or other stuff that you got to take care of. So I'll probably extend the deadline until, like I said, tomorrow at the earliest. Tomorrow at midnight at the earliest, just so that nobody is missing points just because I'm bad at explaining things, probably, or haven't explained certain things as well as like I can for you guys.
all right. Thank you.
Take it easy. No worries. It does take a bit of time, and I know the only reason. I mean, I've been working with it for a little bit of time now, so I kind of have at least a modicum of experience. Um, but I mean, like I said, I'll extend the deadline a little bit more so all of you guys can have the best possible opportunity of getting this stuff done. Um, I don't think I'll have to extend the deadline for the homework unless there's any serious cases or unless any of you guys definitely need an extra hand with anything. But I mean, send me a message or ask other people if there's any specific thing that you might be struggling with, and there might be someone else who has a good answer to it. Um, I'll always be around to try to answer questions as best as I possibly can. And if I don't have like a good answer, I'll either get back to you or we'll try to figure it out together. Especially considering I'm pretty sure this is probably the first experience that a good portion of you have probably had with CAD softwares. Um, the nice thing is that usually they are pretty uniform among each other, so whether it be Solidworks or some other software, you'll usually have a pretty good idea on how to utilize them after you've learned one. I'm not going to act like I know code very well, but when you have an idea of one sort of coding language, you can typically piece together your way through others. Not all of them, but I'm sure through some other coding languages. There's overlap. Okay, so for anybody who's still here, I extended the deadline for the 2 in-class assignments just till tomorrow at midnight at the very least, just because I want you all to be able to understand how things work without the struggle of a fairly short timeline or time period. Need the circle, but I'm not sure how to cut it in half. What do you mean by cut it in half? Oh, I see. I see what you mean. I think I briefly mentioned this. So there's 2 different ways that you could do this. I'll go back to this sketch if you are watching. Edit. So 2 different ways that you could do this. One way is if you just are using the circle tool, you're still going to have part of it that you don't necessarily want there. There's a trim entities button. So this trim entities button will allow you to trim off parts of either lines or arcs that you don't want to have in your sketch that's there. So the 2 things that you're going to want to get rid of are going to be, and try to keep it on power trim. Power trim will use, is it power trim? Why is this one being mean? Come on, behave. There we go. I think it's trim to closest. Yeah, what that will typically do, a lot of these settings we could probably talk a little bit more about next time. Or I can provide maybe a little update on some of these extra settings. But you'll be able to trim away parts of the circle that you don't necessarily want to include. So keep in mind, even though this part is sketched, or this half circle is sketched, it's not actually getting rid of this half circle portion. So you would need to trim away the part of the circle, or part of that half circle that we don't want to include in our sketch. So that's one way that you can create that sort of half circle geometry. another way that you could do it would be to use the arc tool. So there's many options. Um, I tend to like the 3-point arc because it allows you to designate just 2 different endpoints, and then whatever sort of like the radius of curvature will be. But you can use any one of these options to do it. So if we're using the 3-point arc, I would just select on 2 arbitrary locations, and this is going to basically determine the diameter of the circle. So what you're going to want then is, considering you can, or rather, it could be the diameter of the circle, I guess I should say. It's only going to be the diameter of the circle if you align it correctly, such that that kind of center dot, it's hard to see, but that little plus sign is right in between the 2 points. And all of these things are still adjustable via smart dimensioning. Let's say I want it to be a different radius. So I have it here such that it's a radius of 7.5 with some other numbers to it. Maybe I only want it to be 6. So what that'll do is it'll shrink down the radius of the circle a little bit. I'm still going to have to make sure that its adjustments are correct, so it's the correct distance away from whatever side, and then just assign it as such. But that's another method of going about it. I can't remember what center point arc does. I think here, yes, that's right. So center point arc just means that we're starting from the center, going out some radial distance, and then determining how far that arc extends. And all of these things are adjustable as well. Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna yell at myself. I totally left out the trim entities part, which is kind of important for one of the ways of doing that first in-class assignment. Okay, William, for the second assignment, the 2 circles, do they go all the way through? Yes. Yeah, they go all the way through the circle. I think there's other designations and other ways that I can show you guys how far it might go in. So if I'm looking at this shape, whatever the heck this is that I'm doing an example with. So if I clean this up a little bit. What did I do? And then exit. So I had this cut extrude go all the way through, but maybe I only want it to go like halfway. Maybe I just want it to go 25. This would likely be a situation where you'd have some kind of a cross section here to sort of indicate that it doesn't go all the way through. So there would likely be, hopefully this doesn't screw up, but there would likely be some kind of like a cross-sectional view to indicate that it only goes 25 millimeters deep. And those sorts of things I'll kind of show more of and try to explain, possibly through the lecture. So just maybe pose like another kind of demo that requires that sort of indicator to be in the sketch itself. Definitely take a look at the alphabet of lines PDF that I posted, and we kind of briefly went over through the PowerPoint. That the cross-sectional component will be very helpful. That's also something that if you guys have taken like like statics, or you might end up taking later on like a engineering design, any of those sorts of classes, a lot of those kind of symbols and logic are also used in those textbooks. So it will kind of give indications where, hey, maybe I'm looking at a cross section here. So it kind of has that like dotted line with the two perpendicular arrows to that dotted line, indicating, hey, there's more happening at this location here, and then it'll show you another picture of what that cross section looks like. Um, I mean, I hope this doesn't come off as rude. Uh, I would say the only additional knowledge or skills is just make sure your guys' math and geometry is sound. I don't expect all you guys to be math majors or anything like that. There's not going to be any proofs here, but just make sure your geometry is sound and kind of just keeping a keen eye on whatever the drawings might be asking of you. I'll tell you guys right now, I haven't really taught a class as a TA, so I will be prone to making some mistakes here and there. I want you guys to just kind of be aware of that. I know only like half the class is here right now, so uh, you guys are the in crowd right now. But I'm probably gonna make little stupid mistakes here and there, which is par for the course sometimes with either new instructors or old ones. Um, if there's anything that you guys, like I kind of mentioned earlier, especially or just in general, like just ask. Um, I make stupid errors here and there all the freaking time. So if there's anything that seems really ambiguous, or you guys are just like, I have no idea what you're asking here, like, could you explain this a little bit further? It'll probably be like a little wake up call and be like, oh, awesome, I totally didn't add that dimension. Thank you for letting me know. And I'll make sure that that gets uploaded and referenced. I want to make this as good an experience for you guys, so when you guys end up using SolidWorks or any other sort of CAD software later on, uh, you'll at least have a good toolbox and understanding to work with. Of course. Yeah, I think I took it over the summer a couple years back, SolidWorks. So, granted, it was before Rona, so I mean, it was a lot easier to do this thing that we're doing right now in class, because everybody could just be in the same room and ask the professor, hey, what the heck is up with my model? Why isn't it doing this, that, or the other? So it's typically a lot easier when you have that in-class setting for a class like this. But I mean, we'll work with it however we can. I'm slowly learning here and there that even Discord has its own issues and limitations here and there with regard to just presenting. Um, but I just don't like WebEx, so I hate to put it in such a, well, I don't like WebEx, so I'm not going to use it type manner, but I haven't had really many good experiences with it, so that's kind of why I prefer Discord. Sounds good. See you then. What the heck? That's weird. Freehand draw the second shape, but it's saying there's no solution for that shape. So I'm not entirely sure about that error, but the two things that I would think of, make sure your shape is closed. So what I mean by closed is closed shapes will have this kind of like almost like a dull gray blue in the center of it. If it's open, it will usually be hollow or it won't have any color to it. That's what I would first think. I'm not entirely sure otherwise. Yeah, try checking that first. I'm not sure if that's the solution or if that's what the issue is. Let me see. I'm gonna Google. Would you possibly be able to screen share, Ross? So if you want to like unmute and screen share, we could probably take a look at it. I think there's few enough people in here now that it won't yell. Either that or I could just turn mine off. It's an interesting error. I've never... At least I can't think I've heard of that one before. There we go. Okay. I see. So here's the one thing that I would say first. The one thing that you do want primarily is you don't want as much yellow as you have. That's usually, and I know it's kind of difficult at this point for it to stop being a pain. If you can, try to delete some of the dimensions you already have. So just delete a couple of them, and it might kind of free up that situation.
Okay.
Let me
Can you hear me at all or not?
Now I can. Let me actually see what I have here. So the 2.5 is good up top. 1.18 is good. 7.5.
Now my computer is totally being stupid and slow.
That's fine. It happens. 5. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, I see. I think I do at least. I hope I do. So the one thing that I would do in this case is you see that horizontal red bar, correct? If I'm thinking about it correctly, what that's indicating right there is that small 0.79 distance that's on the bottom right is conflicted both by saying that it should be horizontal and vertical. And the only reason it's labeling the horizontal one in red is probably because you already created the original one vertically, and then somehow some relation happened such that it gave uh, such that it thinks it's either in a horizontal position or a vertical position. I think he pieced. Where'd he go? Nope. Welcome back. I think the issue there is that red box, because I believe it's basically saying that there's a conflict between that segment on the bottom right, where it doesn't know whether you want that to be horizontal or vertical. But you do want it to be vertical, so you want to get rid of the horizontal restriction or constraint. So I think if you get rid of that, I think it should be happy. Hopefully. I'm not sure if you can hear me.